The first thing Evan Cross saw was a flash of pink against the orange dusk. Then the tears. A little girl no more than 6 stood in the middle of Highway 163, clutching a weather-beaten suitcase bigger than her legs. No cars for miles, no houses. Just the wind, the desert, and a child crying in the road. If you think you've seen everything, wait until you hear what happened after this moment. It's the kind of story that makes you question fate itself. Before you scroll away, tell me, what would you do if you found a child alone on an empty highway at sunset? Evan slammed the brakes, tires screeching against the cracked asphalt. The girl didn't move. She stood frozen in the glow of his headlights, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. He killed the engine and stepped out, heart-pounding, boots crunching on the gravel. "Hey," he called gently. "You okay, sweetheart?" No answer. Just the dry desert wind whistling through the sagebrush. He could see she was trembling. The suitcase handle dangled from her small hand, and every few seconds her fingers tightened like she was afraid someone might take it away. Evan lowered himself to one knee, trying not to tower over her. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. "My name's Evan. You lost." Still nothing. The girl's wide eyes reflected the last light of the sunset, blue, glassy, terrified. The road stretched endlessly behind her, and instinct told him she hadn't just wandered off. She'd been left. His pulse quickened. He scanned the horizon, no broken-down car, no sign of life, just the distant silhouette of Monument Valley glowing like old embers. The soldier in him, the medic who'd patched up too many broken people, took over. She needed help, and there was no one else around. "Cold?" he asked. She gave the faintest nod. He shrugged off his jacket and placed it on the asphalt between them. "You can take it if you want. I'll stay right here." For a moment, she didn't move. Then, carefully, she stepped forward, slipped into the jacket, and hugged herself inside it. It hung on her like a blanket of safety. That tiny act of trust hit Evan harder than anything he'd faced overseas. He opened the truck door. "It's warmer inside," he said, keeping his tone even. "You can hold your suitcase. I won't touch it." She hesitated, then climbed into the passenger seat, still silent. When he turned the heater on, her small hands hovered near the vent like she'd forgotten what warmth felt like. Evan picked up his phone, only one bar of signal flickering in the corner. He called Highway Patrol, reported finding a child alone on the road. The operator promised a unit was on the way, an hour, maybe more. He looked at the girl so tiny in the seat, clutching her suitcase like her whole world was inside. He couldn't just sit and wait. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked gently. She stared at him, then at the suitcase, and slowly flipped open the latches. Inside were just 3 things: a small violin in a worn case, a faded Polaroid photo, and a stuffed bird with neat blue stitching that read L.E. No clothes, no snacks, nothing else. On the back of the photo was a note in neat handwriting, "For when the wind gets loud." Evan studied the picture. It showed the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, a city hundreds of miles away. His stomach tightened. What was a child from San Francisco doing alone on a desert highway in Utah? He looked back at her, but she was watching him, lips pressed tight like she knew something he didn't dare ask. Before he could say more, headlights flared behind them. A single car, dark-colored, slowing as it approached. Evan's instinct screamed. The vehicle crawled past the driver, turning his face away, brim pulled low. No plates, no markings. Evan memorized the dented fender, the missing wheel cover. Something about it didn't feel right. The car sped up again, vanishing into the horizon. Evan locked the doors and lowered the heater's hum. "You're safe," he said. "No one's going to hurt you." The girl didn't reply, but she set the violin on her lap and ran her tiny fingers along the strings. She didn't play, just touched it reverently, like it was a piece of her heart. His phone buzzed again, an unknown number. He frowned. The message read, "Stay put." Help is coming. He hadn't shared his number with anyone but dispatch. A cold knot formed in his chest. He typed a quick reply, but before it could send another message appeared, "Don't trust the first car." That was all it said. He turned off the cabin lights. The night outside had gone still too still. In the distance, an engine rumbled. Not from behind this time, but ahead. He could see faint lights cresting a hill. A vehicle pulled over 100 yards away, flashing amber beams. A man stepped out wearing a jacket with reflective tape and a badge-shaped patch. "Highway Patrol," he called, voice echoing. "You, the caller?" Evan didn't move. His gut churned. No red and blue strobes, no police hat. Just a patch and a flashlight beam cutting through the dark. Badge number, Evan called back. The man chuckled. "Relax, sir. I'm here to help. Let me see the child." The girl's hand reached for Evan's sleeve, trembling. He looked into her eyes, silent, pleading, and made a decision. He turned off the headlights and whispered, "Don't make a sound." He tapped the hazard lights twice, a subtle SOS pattern, then reached for the old emergency phone he kept for combat zones, one that couldn't be traced. He texted a single contact, possible impersonator. "Send help quietly." The man outside knocked on the hood. "Sir, you don't want this to get complicated." Evan said nothing. He could hear the faint hum of another engine, farther away, lower, steadier. Maybe real backup, maybe something worse. He gripped the steering wheel, jaw clenched. The little girl, still nameless, still holding that violin like a secret, took a deep breath and whispered the first word he'd heard her say. "Run." And in that one word, Evan knew this was no ordinary rescue. It was the beginning of something much, much bigger. The wind had turned cold by the time Evan Cross reached the small mountain town of Flagstaff. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on the girl's suitcase. She hadn't spoken since that one haunting word on the highway run, but she watched every passing mile like she was memorizing the world in case it disappeared again. He took a dirt road off Route 66, winding through tall pines, until a weathered cabin appeared at the edge of a clearing. His father had built it decades ago, long before Evan ever wore a uniform. It wasn't much, just timber stone and silence, but it was safe. He killed the engine and listened. The air here smelled of pine sap and rain-soaked earth, nothing like the desert. For the first time that night, he felt the weight in his chest ease. He turned to her. "We're here," he said quietly. "No one can find us for now." The girl clutched her suitcase but didn't move. He smiled, small but honest. "You can keep it with you. Everything that's yours stays yours." That seemed to matter. She followed him inside without a sound. The cabin was simple. One main room, a potbelly stove, and an old rocking chair that creaked when the wind pressed against the walls. Evan lit a fire, its crackle filling the silence that had followed them all night. The girl sat near the warmth jacket, still swallowing her frame, eyes fixed on the flames. Her face looked softer here, less ghostly, more like a child who might laugh again one day. He found a can of cocoa mix in a cupboard, dented and old, but still good. "Best thing my dad ever left me," he said as he stirred it into warm milk. The girl's nose wrinkled at the smell, but when he handed her the mug, she cupped it carefully, fingers hovering near the steam, like she was learning what comfort felt like. "You can talk whenever you're ready," he said. "No rush." She nodded, sipping slowly. When she finished, she set the cup down, pulled out a small notebook from her suitcase, and began to draw. Her pencil strokes were quick, and certain rooftops abridged the faint outline of a bird. She tore the page out and slid it toward him. Beneath the picture, she'd written one word, Maya. Evan studied the drawing, then looked at her. "Is that your name?" She didn't answer, but glanced at the violin case beside her. He tried again. "Maya, huh? That's beautiful. This time, a flicker of something passed across her face, relief maybe. She took the notebook back and added another detail to the sketch, a tall building with glass walls, a circle logo drawn near the top. He pointed to it. You've seen that before? She nodded. Is that where you lived? Another nod. Then she set the pencil down and whispered almost inaudibly, They took my mom. Evan's hand froze halfway to his coffee mug. He leaned forward, careful not to startle her. Who did? She shook her head, tears brimming, but unshed. She pressed her small hands over her ears, as if the memory itself was too loud. Evan didn't push. Instead, he said, You're safe now, Maya, I promise. He found a spare blanket and draped it over her shoulders. You can sleep in that room, he said, pointing toward a door near the back. She hesitated, then walked inside, suitcase in one hand, violin in the other. When the door clicked shut, Evan sat by the fire and let the night close in. His training told him to call for help again, but his gut told him something was off. Whoever had sent that mysterious message back on the highway had known too much too fast. If someone was looking for this girl, it wasn't just the police. He spent the next morning checking the perimeter. No tracks, no tire marks. Only a fresh set of bird prints by the window, small and neat. When he came back inside, Maya was awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her violin resting on her knees. She didn't play at first. She just plucked one string, then another, listening to the echo bounce off the wooden walls. Finally, she lifted the bow and played a single note, so pure it seemed to hang in the air like sunlight. Evan stood in the doorway stunned. That one note carried weight, a story, a plea, something older than words. That's beautiful, he said softly. Maya looked up. It's my mom's song. He crouched beside her. You play like someone who's been taught by love, he said. The corners of her mouth twitched the beginning of a smile. They spent the afternoon fixing small things around the cabin. Evan taught her how to stack wood for the stove. She showed him how to fold paper cranes from the pages of an old magazine she found. Every so often, she'd hum a melody, and he'd hum along out of tune just to make her roll her eyes. As dusk fell, he gave her a small notebook. When you don't feel like talking, he said, you can draw here instead. Maybe it'll help me understand what you've been through. She nodded, flipping it open. On the first page, she drew a bird again, this time with a key in its beak. Beneath it, she wrote, Find the glass bridge. Evan frowned. Glass bridge? She pointed to the sky, then the horizon, as if somewhere far west held the answer. He remembered the photo from the suitcase, the Golden Gate Bridge. Maybe that was what she meant. Later that night, when Maya had fallen asleep on the couch, violin still tucked beside her, Evan stood by the window. The forest outside was quiet except for a faint mechanical buzz. He looked up. A drone, small blinking red, hovered between the trees before darting away. His stomach turned cold. He killed the lantern and sat in the dark, listening to the fire's last crackles. Someone had found them or was searching. He reached for his phone, typed a message to a friend in law enforcement. Need to trace a drone frequency near Flagstaff. No details, just quiet help. Then he looked back at the couch. Maya stirred in her sleep, murmuring something he couldn't quite hear. Her small hand gripped the edge of his jacket. For the first time in years, Evan realized what it meant to be responsible for someone else's tomorrow. He whispered more to himself than anyone. You're not alone anymore, kid. Outside, the wind shifted through the pines. Somewhere beyond the dark, the world was moving toward them, but for now, in that fragile pocket of warmth, there was only the steady rhythm of a child's breathing and the faint promise of morning. By dawn, Evan Cross knew they couldn't stay in Flagstaff. The drone had been more than a coincidence, and the quiet between the trees no longer felt like safety. It felt like surveillance. He packed what little they had, a few cans of food, 2 blankets, and Maya's violin case. She didn't argue when he said they had to leave. She simply nodded and tucked her stuffed bird into the pocket of his jacket like she understood the road was waiting again. They headed south toward Sedona, the red rocks blazing in morning light. Evan drove without music, watching the mirrors every few minutes. Maya sat in the passenger seat, tracing her finger over the window fog. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. It was the first full sentence she'd spoken to him. The sound of her voice startled him. "Somewhere with answers," he said. "Maybe someone who can help us understand that bridge you drew." She reached into her violin case and pulled out a small microchip taped beneath the lining. He froze. "Where'd you find that?" he asked. "It was inside the bird," she said. "I saw you open it before. You didn't take it out." Evan let out a slow breath. Smart kid. The chip was thin metallic, engraved with the same initials, LIG, and something else, a serial code, and the word Viriotech. He recognized the name. It was a billion-dollar tech corporation based in San Francisco, one that had made the news for a major internal scandal 6 months earlier. They stopped for gas at a roadside station outside Oak Creek Canyon. Evan filled the tank, scanning the lot out of habit. A white SUV sat parked by the dumpster's engine off, but windows too dark. His instincts told him it had been there longer than it should have. When he climbed back into the truck, he caught a glimpse of Maya's reflection, wide-eyed, staring past him. "Evan," she whispered, "that car was behind us yesterday." He started the engine without a word. "Seatbelt," he said, voice calm but clipped. As they pulled back onto the highway, the SUV followed, slow at first, then faster. Evan pushed the truck harder through the winding turns of the canyon until the road opened wide and sun flooded in. He cut right into a side road, gravel spraying, and ducked behind a cluster of junipers. The SUV roared past, never slowing. Maya was gripping the seat breath shallow. He reached over and touched her shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded, but didn't speak. "You ever play hide-and-seek?" he asked. She blinked, confused. "That's what we're doing," he said. "Only difference is, I've been playing longer." That earned him a small, fleeting smile. By noon, they reached a small diner in the heart of Sedona, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. Evan ordered 2 grilled cheeses and asked the waitress if there was still a retired ranger named Ben Yazzie living nearby. Her eyebrows lifted. "Ben's up by the old ranger outpost near the airport mesa. Why, just looking for an old friend," he said. They found Ben sitting on the porch of a weathered cabin overlooking the red cliffs. He was in his 70s, eyes sharp as a hawk's. When Evan explained about the embroidered bird and showed him the photo from the suitcase, Ben studied it for a long moment. "That pattern," he said, tapping the stitching, "it's Navajo for wind spirit. The key on the beak means message. Whoever made this wasn't making a toy. They were hiding something." Evan handed him the microchip. Ben turned it over in his palm. "You said Viriotech. I've heard that name. They've got labs scattered all over Arizona, New Mexico, California. Big money, private contracts, not the kind that like questions." That night, Evan and Maya checked into a roadside motel near the Grand Canyon. The TV buzzed softly while Maya sketched in her notebook. A breaking news segment flickered across the screen. Viriotech's CEO had resigned after a public fallout with the company's board. A picture of the man appeared, sharp suit, gray hair, tired eyes. The caption beneath read, "Derek Ellison, founder and CEO of Viriotech Industries." Maya dropped her pencil. "That's my dad." Evan turned to her, the weight of the name hitting hard. "You're Lark Ellison." She looked away. "Mom called me Maya. She said it was safer." The room went still. Outside, a semi rumbled past on the highway, the sound fading into the night. Evan rubbed a hand over his face. It suddenly made sense, the bracelet, the photo, the corporate messages the SUV. Whoever had been following them wasn't just looking for a missing child. They were trying to contain a story worth millions. Evan opened his laptop and connected to a secure network he still had access to from his Army days. He uploaded the microchip's data. Within minutes, a flood of encrypted files appeared: medical research patient trials, private memos. One document stopped him cold: Project Vireo, genetic therapy subject Lark Ellison, minor. He scrolled through the details: references to experimental treatment, proprietary DNA mapping, and internal disputes between executives. His jaw tightened. "They used you, kid," he said quietly. "Your dad's company was testing something they shouldn't have, and when it got exposed, they hid you to keep you safe or to keep you quiet." Maya's voice broke the silence. "Is my dad bad?" He looked at her, torn. "I don't know, Maya, but somebody sure made him look that way." A sudden knock rattled the door. 3 short raps, then 2 more. Evan reached for the pistol he'd kept locked in the glove box since the service. He gestured for Maya to hide behind the bed. "Stay down." The knocks came again, louder. "Mr. Cross," a voice called. "We're with Child Services. Open the door." He moved silently to the peephole. 2 people stood outside, both in plain clothes, both smiling too much. But it was the black SUV idling in the lot that told him everything he needed to know. He turned back to Maya. "You trust me?" She nodded, eyes wide. "Then listen close. We're leaving through the bathroom window." Quiet as ghosts. Minutes later, they slipped out into the cold air and crossed behind the building. The truck was parked 2 blocks over. As they climbed in, Evan looked once more at the horizon, glowing faintly under a new moon. He didn't know where the next road led, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't turning back. Maya leaned her head against the window, the violin case balanced on her knees. "Where now?" she asked. "East," Evan said. "Santa Fe? Someone there owes me a favor." The truck roared to life, tires crunching over gravel. In the rearview mirror, the motel lights faded to pinpoints. Ahead, the dark stretched wide open, and for the first time since the highway, Evan felt a strange kind of calm. The chase had begun, but so had the choice that would define them both. The morning they reached San Francisco, fog rolled in heavy from the bay, wrapping the city in gray like it was holding its breath. Evan Cross hadn't slept in nearly 30 hours. His truck rattled across the Golden Gate Bridge, the same bridge in the photo from Maya's suitcase. She was awake now, her face pressed to the window, eyes wide with something that looked like recognition and fear at once. "This is it, isn't it?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "That's where my dad works," she whispered. Her voice was small but certain. Evan followed her gaze toward the skyline, a tower of glass rising above the city, the Vireo Tech logo gleaming faintly through the fog. They parked near the edge of Golden Gate Park and walked the rest of the way. Maya clutched his hand, her violin case bumping against her leg. Each step felt like walking into the heart of a storm. When they reached the conservatory, she stopped. "She used to bring me here," Maya said. "My mom." Evan looked down at her. "Do you want to wait here?" She shook her head. "No, I need to see him." Evan contacted an old friend at the FBI who owed him more than one favor. Within an hour, 2 agents met them in a quiet corner of the park. They listened as Evan explained everything: the highway, the messages, the chip, the corporate chase. When he handed them the data from the microdrive, one of the agents swore under his breath. "We've been trying to get this for months," he said. "Vireotech's been under investigation for illegal genetic trials. This changes everything." While the agents made calls, Maya stood by the pond, staring at her reflection. "He didn't protect me," she said softly. "He protected his company." Evan crouched beside her. "Maybe both," he said. "Sometimes people make terrible choices trying to do the right thing." She looked up at him, eyes full of questions too heavy for her age. "Will they take me away?" she asked. He swallowed hard. "They might. But they'll make sure you're safe." An hour later, a black SUV approached the park, not the menacing kind this time. 2 uniformed officers stepped out, followed by a tall man in a gray coat. He looked older than the photo, more worn, but unmistakably the same face, Derek Ellison. He froze when he saw Maya. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then she whispered, "Dad?" Derek crossed the distance slowly, his expression cracking open. "Lark," he said, voice breaking. She flinched at the name. "It's Maya now," she said. Tears welled in his eyes. "You look just like your mom." She looked at the ground. "They took her," she said. She tried to stop them. Evan stepped back, giving them space. Derek turned toward him. "You were the one who found her." Evan nodded. On a desert road, she was running from something she shouldn't have had to. Derek's voice trembled. "They told me she was gone. I didn't know who to trust. I started the project to save my wife. It was supposed to be therapy research, not a weapon. When I tried to stop it, they came after us." The agents approached, briefing Derek quickly. The investigation was expanding, arrests already underway, warrants issued. Derek listened, his face pale, then turned back to his daughter. "You're safe now," he said. "I swear it." She didn't answer right away. She looked at Evan instead. "You'll still come, right?" she asked. Evan hesitated, his throat tightening. "If you need me, yeah." When the agents led Derek and Maya toward the waiting car, Evan stood watching. Maya turned once before climbing in and lifted her hand, fingers spread in that small 3-finger signal they'd made in the truck team rules. He lifted his hand back, 3 fingers up, then let it fall. The next few days passed in a blur of statements, interviews, and silence. Evan stayed in a small motel near the wharf. Every news channel in the country carried the story, Viraeotech executives arrested. Whistleblower data revealed CEO Derek Ellison cooperating with federal authorities. There were pictures of Maya, too, smiling faintly beside her father. Evan muted the TV before the ache could sink deeper. One evening, as the sun fell over the bay, a knock came at his door. It was Derek, looking exhausted but grateful. They cleared everything he said. "My wife's safe under protection. Maya's with her now. She wanted you to have this." He handed Evan a small velvet pouch. Inside was the silver bracelet, the one she'd worn the night he found her. The feather charm gleamed under the dying light, newly engraved, "Thank you for staying." Evan turned it over in his hand. Words caught in his throat. "She's strong," Derek said quietly. "Stronger because of you." After he left, Evan sat by the window, the city lights flickering like distant campfires. For the first time in years, he let himself breathe without guarding the edges of it. Somewhere across the bay, a little girl slept safely in her bed, the sound of her violin probably drifting through the walls of a home that had almost been lost. He smiled faintly, whispering into the quiet, "Good-night, kid." Outside, fog rolled back in over the water, soft and endless. The city exhaled, and for a moment it felt like the world had finally learned to rest. 6 months later, winter gave way to a soft Colorado spring. The mountains outside Denver glowed in pale gold, and the world seemed quieter somehow. Evan Cross parked his truck outside a community center downtown, the kind with faded murals and the smell of coffee always drifting from the kitchen. Inside, a group of kids tuned their instruments for the weekend recital, their laughter spilling into the hallway. He paused, listening, feeling that familiar tug in his chest. It wasn't the sound of battle or rescue that filled his life anymore. It was the music of children rediscovering joy. He had started volunteering at the center 3 months ago, mostly helping with first aid training, but somehow ended up in the music room more often than not. The director, a kind woman named Marisol, had laughed the first time she caught him restringing a violin. "Didn't take you for the artsy-type soldier," she teased. He smiled. "I'm learning." The truth was, he couldn't hear the sound of a violin without thinking of one little girl's hands on the strings, her eyes closed, her heart somewhere in the music. On this particular morning, the kids were buzzing. Today was the big spring concert. Evan helped carry folding chairs to the small auditorium, straightened music stands, then slipped backstage. There, waiting with her bow in hand and that same feather bracelet on her wrist, was Maya. She'd grown in half a year, her hair longer, her eyes brighter. When she saw him, she broke into a grin that could have melted ice. "You made it," she said. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. Her father, Derek Ellison, stood nearby, dressed simply for once, no longer the polished CEO from the headlines. The man looked like someone who had learned how to breathe again. "She insisted you sit front row," Derek said. "Said the first note won't sound right if you're not there." Evan chuckled softly. "Guess I better not make her nervous then." When the lights dimmed and the stage filled with children holding violins and cellos, Maya took her place at the front. The first few notes wavered uncertain, then found their footing. Her bow moved like it was painting something invisible in the air. And then came her solo, clear, strong, full of life. Halfway through, she looked toward him, eyes glistening, and the melody shifted into something he recognized instantly. The song she'd played for her mother, the one she'd whispered about by the fire months ago. The room fell into that rare kind of silence where everyone breathes together. When she finished, there was no sound for a heartbeat, and then the applause came like thunder. Afterward, the crowd spilled into the hallway, buzzing with pride. Maya ran straight to him, violin still in hand. "Did you like it?" she asked. Evan knelt to meet her gaze. "Kid," he said with a smile, "you didn't just play a song, you built a bridge." Her laugh came easy. "That's what Mom says too." Derek joined them, holding out a small envelope. "She wanted you to have this," he said. Inside was a photograph of the three of them at the park, weeks earlier, Maya holding her violin, Derek with his arm around her, and Evan, standing just behind them, smiling like a man who'd finally found peace. On the back, in Maya's handwriting, it read, "You taught me that home isn't a place. It's people who stay." Evan swallowed the lump in his throat. "You didn't have to give me anything," he said. Derek shook his head. "You gave us everything. The truth, the courage to face it, and time." Outside, the late afternoon sun poured across the mountains. Evan walked them to their car, standing by as they buckled in. "We're heading back to San Francisco next week," Derek said. "There's a foundation being built, the Vireo Promise. It'll fund research for kids, but under public oversight this time. Maya's the inspiration behind it." She leaned out the window, grinning. "You're coming to visit, right?" He laughed. "If I get invited." "You don't need an invitation," she said. "You're family." He watched them drive away until the car disappeared down the street. For a long moment he stood still, the envelope clutched in his hand, the mountain air cool against his skin. That evening, back inside the quiet community center, he sat alone at the piano, plunking at the keys without purpose. Marisol peeked in, smiling. "You've got the face of a man who just remembered why he's here," she said. "Yeah," he said, half laughing. "Guess I did." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the bracelet, the same one she'd given him before she left the hospital, the one engraved with "Thank you for staying." It glinted under the fading light. He slipped it around his wrist and whispered, "Still staying, kid." The next morning, he filled out papers to officially establish the Cross Foundation for Rescue Medics, named after his late mother, who taught him that kindness isn't a duty, it's a choice. It would fund emergency responders, trauma, care for veterans, and programs for children who'd lost too much too young. Weeks later, when the Denver Post ran a feature on local heroes, the headline read, "Former Soldier Finds His Mission Beyond the Battlefield." Evan didn't keep the clipping, but he kept the photograph of Maya's concert taped above his desk. Some nights, when the world outside went quiet, he could almost hear that melody again, the one that began in the middle of a desert highway with a frightened little girl and a suitcase full of secrets. He'd once believed his life was measured by the things he survived. Now he understood it was measured by the people he showed up for. And sometimes showing up again and again without promise of reward was the closest thing to grace this world ever offered. When you look back at the story of Evan Cross and little Maya Ellison, it's hard not to feel something stirred deep inside, a reminder that even in the loneliest, most unexpected moments, life has a way of bringing two broken paths together to make something whole again. What began on an empty Arizona highway, a weary soldier and a frightened child, turned into a journey that tested every boundary of courage, trust, and love. Evan, once haunted by the ghosts of war and loss, found redemption not on a battlefield, but on a road lined with silence and a child's tears. He could have kept driving that night. Many people would have. But he stopped. And that single decision to choose compassion over convenience changed everything. From that moment, his purpose shifted from surviving to saving, from isolation to connection. Maya, a child born into a world of betrayal and secrets, learned something just as profound. She discovered that not everyone who leaves stays gone, and not everyone who finds you is meant to disappear. Through Evan's steady presence, she began to heal the wounds of abandonment, to see that love can exist in many forms and that family isn't always tied by blood, it's forged by choice, by shared courage, by the quiet promise to stay. Their story wasn't easy. There were nights filled with fear, highways that led nowhere, and truths that shattered their illusions. Yet every obstacle became a step towards something greater. Evan found a new mission, helping others reclaim hope. Maya found her voice again, her music becoming the echo of a spirit that refused to be silenced. And Derek Ellison, the father who nearly lost everything, discovered that redemption doesn't come from power or money, but from the willingness to face the truth and begin again. What stays from their journey isn't just the reunion or the justice served, it's the transformation. The soldier who thought he had nothing left to give ended up saving a future. The girl who thought no one wanted her became the reason a man learned to love again. And through it all, they both learned that life's greatest miracles often begin with small acts of decency, a hand offered a word, spoken a promise kept. So, what can we take from this story today? In a world that often feels divided, cold, or indifferent, Evan and Maya remind us that kindness is still the most powerful force we have. You don't need a uniform or a title to make a difference. You just need to pay attention to see the person crying on the side of the road, to listen when someone's silence speaks louder than words, to show up even when it's inconvenient. Maybe the lesson isn't about heroism at all. Maybe it's about presence, about showing up for others and for ourselves. Because the truth is, every one of us is fighting a battle the world can't see. And sometimes what saves us isn't being rescued, it's being remembered. So, if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that compassion still matters, let that feeling stay with you. Carry it into your own life. Help someone who needs it. Forgive when it's hard. Choose to stay when it would be easier to walk away. Because that's how change begins, quietly, one choice at a time. And if you want more stories like this, stories that remind us of the goodness still left in people, of hope that never dies, then subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep creating, to keep sharing, to keep believing in the power of humanity. Thank you for being here. And remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness can be the start of someone else's miracle.